Hello, I'm Gwen Eiffel, and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. Joining me around the table are Michael Crowley of Time Magazine, Doyle McManus of the Los Angeles Times, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report, and Nancy Youssef of McClatchy Newspapers. There's been a lot going on the foreign policy front, but if you were in Washington this week, you would have thought it was all about Africa. The Africa Summit attracted more than 50 world leaders from the continent, and while the discussions may have touched on problems like corruption, terrorism, and Ebola, to name a few, the focus was on the promise of investment and new infrastructure and American dollars. Penny Pritzker is the U.S. Secretary of Commerce.
Make no mistake, our economic and commercial partnership is a two-way street. Goods and services exports from the United States to African markets support roughly 250,000 jobs here at home. As Africa's middle class continues to expand, we hope to see our export numbers grow too.
That's happy talk right there, Doyle. Did everybody leave happy?
Not exactly. No, nobody ever leaves a summit like this with everything they wanted. And, there were more than 50 African leaders in Washington. Most of them already came with a little chip on their shoulder because they weren't going to get a one-on-one with the President of the United States. Now, you've got the leaders of big countries here who are used to getting the one-on-one, but the White House said, gee, if we did 15 minutes with all of them, the President would be sitting in that chair for something like 12 hours. Actually, there was some good done. $33 billion in new investments announced.
Much from private sector.
A lot of it from the private sector. A new commitment to make the administration has this very interesting proposal, really just getting off the ground, to bring electricity to enormous parts of Africa. Okay, they tripled the target from 20 million people to 60 million people. That's all great, but it has been a lot slower on the ground than anybody expected it was going to be. It's really hard to make this done, get this kind of stuff done, and there's so much else in the world competing for attention.
Michael, what issues did everyone agree to sidestep at this summit and really not focus on because of their fear that it would be a distraction?
Well, I mean, I think the big issue that, look, the goal of this summit in many ways was to change the narrative of Africa, right? I think particularly for the typical American, they may have an outdated view of Africa, or they may have a view of parts of Africa which are still very underdeveloped, which are still very poor, which are struggling. But, as you heard Penny Pritzker say there is this growing middle class. It is now a climate that's ripe for investment. I think it was unfortunate, for instance, that this Ebola outbreak, which is a terrible thing in its own right, was happening just at the moment of this summit and really dominated the coverage of the summit, because that is the kind of narrative that this summit was designed to change, that Africa is not all about, exotic, frightening diseases where people are coughing up blood and health systems that can't cope. So that's a topic that they weren't able to dodge, but I think is an example of something they would have liked to.
But what about human rights? That was another one of those issues, guys, that they decided they wanted they acknowledged that there were some problematical actors coming to Washington this week.
Right. Well, I mean, there's been some progress in Uganda. Doyle, you may know more about that, but, in particular, some of the anti-gay legislation there is really quite horrendous. And I think there was a step back from that, which was a slight positive sign.
But you still had a rogues gallery of dictators at this meeting, people who never would have gotten a dinner invitation to the White House otherwise, like the president of Angola and the president of Equatorial Guinea and the current president of Ethiopia. I mean,
South Sudan.
Very long South Sudan. I mean, we go through it. I mean, there were a few who didn't make the cut, like Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, but yeah, they pretty much had to, and it was striking how little even human rights was even mentioned by American officials. They mentioned good governance and civil society, these nice kind of euphemisms. And then they said, well, we're going to talk about that in private. So I actually went back to the White House afterwards and said, okay, tell me who you roughed up in private. Who did you read the riot act to? Oh, well, we don't actually have any specifics.
Yeah. Nancy, I want to talk to you because I want to go back to Afghanistan, because another thing that happened that was kind of surprising this week was the assassination, killing of a two-star general, highest-ranking military figure to die since the Vietnam War, Harold Green, and he was there as part of the training mission. So that was a setback.
He was the deputy in charge of the training mission, which is the keystone to the U.S. exit strategy. And this has been a problem, what the U.S. military calls green on blue incidents, where the very people that they're training then turn on them and kill them. And this
We're certain this was an Afghan soldier who did that?
Yes. What had happened was he was going to see a water treatment facility at their National Defense University, what's often called the West Point of the Afghan army. And he was looking at this water treatment facility with a bunch of other senior commanders from Germany, from the UK, and also from Afghanistan. This Afghan soldier was based out of there, had done a patrol, comes back, didn't turn in his weapon when everybody else did, went into a bathroom, this is the CNN report, and from the bathroom shot at them from about 100 yards away. And this is an incident, this green on blue problem that has been plaguing the U.S. military effort there. The U.S. thought it had finally gotten under control. It was at its peak in terms of incidents, I think 62 in 2012. And so the fact that it came back in such a way that to kill a two-star general really shocked a military that is seemingly unflappable after a decade plus of war. And so they had a dignified transfer ceremony this week, and his wife, who was a retired colonel from the Army, his son, a second lieutenant in the Army, were there, and he'll have a funeral next week. But it's really shocked the military and reinforced the idea that whatever security measures you put in place, whatever efforts you make to mitigate this problem, it cannot be fully eliminated as a threat.
It's still a difficult place. Amy, a little politics. Nice segue there. You wrote us a piece this week about basically about the politics of economic distress. And given now that we're basically gotten through all the primary season, and the Tea Party, which was supposed to take out a couple of big senators, didn't quite do it. What was driving the voters who did bother to show up? Not as many as we have been led to believe would. And is the economy, no matter how much it's getting better, is it that sinking in?
Yeah. So I think there are two things. The first is, the economy may be getting better, according to economists, but voters haven't bought into it. And so the question, in some ways, is, have they not bought into it because they really do have some economic issues? There still is economic distress. And the Wall Street Journal NBC poll suggested that, yes, you had a great number of people who are still digging out. We're hearing a lot now about debt collectors and how many people are getting phone calls and are still in credit problems. But there's another piece of it, too, which is the politics of it. And I went back and I looked at, how long did it take once for Bill Clinton, as the economy was getting better, how long did it take for people to really buy into that? Remember George H.W. Bush, the economy was actually getting better as he was ousted.
Right.
What happened essentially, though, was it was really in the mid to late 90s, after his first term, economy's getting better. You saw the unemployment drop, his approval rating rise. What was happening, though, was Republicans were buying into this. They were saying, yeah, we think things are getting better. We like the direction the country's going in. With this president, Republicans have been sour about the economy, sour about the direction of the country, basically, since Obama was inaugurated. And that hasn't changed, even as the unemployment rate has dropped.
So why are Pat Roberts, Mitch McConnell, Lamar Alexander, all these...
How did these guys all win?
How did they survive? They were supposed to be endangered Republicans. Right. Everybody hates them.
You can look at it two ways. You can say, well, boy, the Tea Party's dead. They didn't knock anybody off, the first time since 2008 that every single incumbent Republican won. Or you can look at it this way, which is, these guys barely won in their own party. The Republicans, I think, coming out of these primaries, look more divided and weaker than ever because there is no unity right now. There's no center to the Republican Party. And if you're a 2016 candidate, you were saying, oh, my gosh, I've got a very tough primary ahead of me if I'm going to go appeal to that broader base.
Truly, if you think the Tea Party is dead, then don't tell that to Ted Cruz.
No.
Thank you, everybody. Stay online and read what else our panelists are reporting and dive into the Washington Week Vault, where we can tell you about that time that Richard Nixon tried to shut us down. It's true. And we'll see you next week on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.